Fat mail-order bride sold to Circus as freak show, Mountain Man said, "You're my angel of music." The train hissed into Hollow Creek like a tired beast, and Seraphina Nightingale stepped down with a scuffed valise and a paper sign pressed to her chest. For Mr. Augustus Fairweather, opera house owner. 24, full-figured, wrapped in a traveling cloak too thin for the winter, she held herself the way only a singer can. Spine tall, chin lifted, breath steady against the cold. Miss Nightingale? Augustus materialized from the steam, narrow-shouldered, silk scarf too bright, eyes measuring rather than meeting. His smile stalled when he took in the woman before him, and something mean slid into place behind his pupils. "You cannot be Seraphina," he said, voice brittle. "I ordered a muse, not a menagerie." Sarah swallowed. "You heard my cylinders. You saw my photograph." "I heard a voice," he cut in, "fit for angels." His gaze swept her like a blade. Audiences don't close their eyes. Before she could answer, a rotund man with waxed mustaches and a coat loud enough to frighten horses waddled forward, tipping his hat as if the whole platform belonged to him. "P.T. Grimsby, proprietor of Grimsby's Carnival of Curiosities," he boomed. "If the opera won't have her, I will. $100 for the singing fat lady. She'll sell out the tent by supper time." Augustus's lips thinned, avarice drowning whatever shame might have been left. "She is under contract to me, but contracts can be assigned." He plucked the valise from Sarah's grip as if to prove it. "Her recordings, of course, remain my property." Sarah's breath fractured in the cold. "I am an artist," she said softly, though the words shook. "Not a spectacle." "Then sing in a proper body," Augustus replied, already reaching for Grimsby's outstretched purse. The deal would have been sealed right there on the platform, with steam wreathing their cruelty like incense, if not for the voice that rose from the shadows beyond the baggage carts. Deep, resonant, carrying the hush of pines and the echo of cathedrals, it slipped between their words and stilled them. "That is no exhibit in a cage," the stranger said. "That is a nightingale." A giant stepped from the drifted dark, hair silvered like frost, shoulders broad beneath a workman's coat, a violin case worn smooth in one hand. His eyes, sea blue, steady, rested on Sarah as if he'd found a miracle in a rail yard. "My name is Orpheus Sterling," he said, each syllable calm as a bow drawn true. "Name your price, and I'll buy her freedom, or better, put away your papers and let the lady choose." Steam curled, coins clinked. Sarah's heart, caged for months, beat once against the bars. Seraphina, Sarah Nightingale, had once believed her voice alone would be enough to carry her through life. In Boston, she had studied under maestros, sung arias in candlelit halls, and dreamed of the great opera houses of Europe. But critics, always blunt in their cruelty, had dismissed her. A voice like velvet, yes, but who would pay to see a diva shaped like that? Letters from Augustus Fairweather had seemed like salvation. He wrote of admiration, of the promise of a stage where only her voice mattered. He spoke of partnership, of a future where art reigned above vanity. Sarah had clung to those words, spent her last savings on a ticket west, and stepped onto the train with hope folded neatly between her dresses. Yet hope wilted fast in Hollow Creek. Augustus wasn't a visionary. He was a merchant in silk gloves. Where she saw music as the language of the soul, he saw receipts, applause measured in coin. When Grimsby offered to purchase her like a carnival curiosity, Augustus's eyes gleamed as though he had just discovered a second box office. Grimsby himself was the embodiment of the carnival he owned, loud, greedy, perfumed with tobacco and cheap whiskey. His wagons carried every oddity the world could cough up: tattooed women, giants, dwarves, and contortionists who bent like broken marionettes. To him, Sarah wasn't a singer. She was a signboard. The amazing fat lady who sings like an angel. The people of Hollow Creek gathered on the platform, drawn by the commotion. Laughter simmered at the edges. "Imagine her in satin," someone whispered. "She'd burst the seams." Another snickered. "Opera? More like supper." Sarah's cheeks burned hot against the frost. Each jeer was a dagger, sharper for being familiar. Echoes of Boston critics, of whispered gossip in conservatory corridors. She wrapped her cloak tighter, wishing she could vanish, wishing her voice could lift her above them all. And then there was him. Orpheus Sterling, the man from the shadows, was unlike any she had ever seen. Nearly 7 feet tall, with hands roughened by iron and strings alike, he radiated the strength of a mountain, yet carried himself with the stillness of a cathedral. Rumors whispered that he had once conducted orchestras in Vienna, that tragedy had driven him into the wilderness. He lived now on Harmony Ridge, building instruments, crafting music no audience had heard in a decade. But when he looked at her, his gaze was not curious nor cruel. It was reverent, as if she were not a freak to be bartered, but a psalm returned to him after years of silence. In that moment, Sarah understood 2 truths. Augustus had lied to her, and Orpheus, this stranger who named her a nightingale in front of all Hollow Creek, saw her as no one ever had. Yet choice was not hers. Augustus held the contract. Grimsby jingled his coins, and the crowd, hungry for humiliation, leaned closer, waiting to see the fat girl caged. The wagons of Grimsby's Carnival of Curiosities rattled over frozen ground like a procession of chained beasts. Lanterns swung from their wooden sides, throwing long, grotesque shadows across the road. Inside one wagon, barred, with a crude sign nailed to its flank, sat Seraphina Nightingale, the amazing singing fat lady, nature's cruelest joke. The words carved themselves into her chest every time she read them. She had begged, wept, protested, but Augustus had turned his back, coins heavy in his pocket. Grimsby had laughed and said, "The crowd won't pay to weep for you, darling, but they'll pay to laugh. And that, my nightingale, is your job now." Her first nights in the carnival were torment. The ringmaster would gesture toward her cage, and she was ordered to sing. Children pointed, men jeered, women tittered behind gloved hands. "Sing, piggy, sing! Let's hear the cow moo a lullaby." Look at her wobble when she takes a breath. Sarah would close her eyes, lift her chin, and let the music escape anyway. Arias she had once sung under chandeliers, now spilling into sawdust and smoke. The cruelty of it gnawed her soul. Each note felt like a prayer slipping from captivity, a fragment of dignity in a place built on humiliation. But in the silence after, there was always one voice missing, the voice that had spoken at the train station. Orpheus Sterling. She saw him sometimes at the edges of the crowd, a giant among townsfolk, standing in shadows where torchlight could not quite reach. He did not jeer, he did not smile, he only watched with eyes that burned with something between grief and awe. When the wagons rattled toward the next town, Sarah would sometimes hear it, the faintest whisper of music on the night wind, a violin. notes so pure they made her ribs ache. She would press her ear to the slats of her cage and imagine those notes were meant for her. One night, the carnival stopped in Pine Valley, a mining town tucked between cliffs. After the jeering crowds had gone and the campfires had burned low, Sarah found herself humming softly in her cage, a prayer more than a performance. That was when the violin answered. The sound floated from the tree line, weaving around her voice like a lover's hand. She startled, then leaned forward, breath caught in wonder. Out of the darkness stepped Orpheus Sterling, bow in hand, his instrument gleaming like polished fire under the moon. "I told you," he said, voice low, carrying easily across the frost. "You are not a freak, you are a nightingale." Tears stung her eyes. "Why are you here?" "Because I cannot sleep," he confessed, "knowing your song is caged." She gripped the bars, trembling. "They will not let me go." He played a phrase low and aching before answering. "Then I will make them." The promise hung in the air, heavier than snow, brighter than flame. The next morning, Orpheus appeared in Grimsby's gaudy tent, a heavy purse of gold in his hand. "The singer," he said, voice like an anvil striking true. "Name your price." Grimsby laughed, wheezing through cigar smoke. $1,000. Enough to buy a ranch outright. You'd never... Done. Orpheus dropped the purse on the table. Coins spilled across the sawdust like fallen stars. Grimsby blinked, eyes wide. Greed overcame even mockery. "She's yours, then. But don't come crying when the world mocks you, too." That afternoon, before the eyes of every carny and gawking townsman, Orpheus unlocked Sarah's cage and helped her down. His hand engulfed hers, steady, reverent, not ashamed to touch her. "Why?" she whispered, still dazed, clutching her threadbare shawl around her. "Why would you spend so much on me?" Orpheus looked down at her, the faintest smile softening his storm-weathered face. "Because music is the only thing that has ever kept me alive. And last night you gave it back to me." The crowd stared, silent for once. No jeers, no laughter. Only the sight of a mountain of a man leading a fallen songbird away from the cage that had broken her. And thus began the climb toward Harmony Ridge, where Orpheus promised freedom, but also where both their pasts, haunted and unspoken, would meet them in the silence between songs. The trail to Harmony Ridge wound upward like a hymn written in stone and snow. Sarah rode beside Orpheus in a sturdy wagon laden with supplies, her heart torn between awe and fear. For the first time in months, she was free of the cage, yet freedom was a fragile thing. What if this mountain man's kindness was only pity, or worse, another trap? But when they crested the ridge, her breath caught. Before her stretched a homestead unlike anything she had imagined. A cabin built of pine logs, its beams carved with musical motifs, shutters painted deep blue, and behind it a vast workshop whose open doors revealed rows of half-built violins, cellos, and harps. And farther still, an annex hall, its high roof arched like a cathedral, walls lined in polished wood. "A concert hall?" she whispered, almost afraid to speak the words. Orpheus nodded, guiding the wagon to a halt. "I built it for someone who never lived to sing here. Perhaps now it has found its singer." Inside the cabin, warmth enveloped her. A fire roared in the stone hearth, and the air smelled of cedar and beeswax. The kitchen shelves were lined with jars of dried herbs and berries. In the corner, a loom held half-finished fabric. It was a home not just for survival, but for beauty. "This room is yours," Orpheus said, opening a door to reveal a chamber prepared with unexpected tenderness. The bed was sturdy oak, covered with a quilt stitched in musical notes. A vanity stood by the window, and beside it a grand piano gleamed under a dust sheet. "I thought you might want a place to practice." Sarah pressed her hands to her mouth. No one had ever given her space, let alone a sanctuary, for her art. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice trembling. Orpheus's eyes softened, though sorrow flickered in their depths. "Because once I loved a singer. She died before her song was finished. I could not save her, but perhaps I can help you." From that day forward, their lives intertwined like melody and harmony. Mornings began with chores. Orpheus taught her to split kindling, to gather water from the frozen stream, to tend the goats that bleated in the pen behind the cabin. He always took the heavier burdens, never mocking her struggles. When she fumbled with the axe, he stood behind her, guiding her hands, his voice a low rumble. "Don't fight the wood. Let the grain show you where to strike." Afternoons belonged to music. In the great hall, Orpheus would tune a violin while Sarah warmed her voice with scales that rose like sunlight through stained glass. At first she felt shy, haunted by memories of laughter and jeers. But when Orpheus accompanied her on piano, his gaze steady, she felt strength flow back into her. Her voice grew bolder, richer, freer. One evening, she faltered midway through an aria, tears spilling as old humiliation choked her. "They called me a freak," she whispered. "Even when I sang with all my heart, it was never enough." Orpheus set his violin aside and came to her. He did not argue, did not try to erase her pain with platitudes. Instead, he simply knelt, taking her hands in his massive ones. "Their laughter was the lie," he said quietly. "Your song is the truth, and truth always outlives mockery." Slowly, laughter gave way to tenderness in her memory, replaced by his words echoing in her chest. Nights were the gentlest. They ate by lamplight. Stew simmered with wild herbs, bread baked on stone. Orpheus always served her first, always made sure her cup was filled. When snow rattled the shutters, he stoked the fire higher. When she shivered, he draped his own cloak over her shoulders, though his breath steamed in the cold. Sometimes, after supper, he would play his violin alone, filling the cabin with haunting melodies. She would listen in silence, the music winding around her heart like a balm. Other nights, he urged her to sing while he accompanied her, and the cabin transformed into an opera house that needed no audience. Each small act of care drew them closer. The way he carved her a music stand from cedar wood, the way she mended the tear in his shirt, her stitches neat and patient, the way his calloused hand lingered a moment too long when passing her a plate, the way she found herself humming his melodies even while fetching water. Day by day, the scars left by cages and jeers began to heal. In their place bloomed something fragile, luminous, and terrifyingly beautiful: trust. And beneath that trust, unspoken but undeniable, stirred love. For a time, Harmony Ridge seemed untouchable. Snow fell like lace across the rooftops, firelight gleamed against polished wood, and music poured through the halls as if the mountain itself were listening. But beneath the peace, shadows stirred. Both Orpheus and Sarah carried pasts that refused to stay buried, and far below the ridge, Augustus Fairweather and P.T. Grimsby nursed their greed like wolves sniffing blood. It began with whispers in town. Merchants who delivered flour and salt up the ridge carried back stories. The fat opera girl sings in the mountains. The reclusive giant has taken her as his bride. Her voice is worth a fortune. Her recordings could fill theaters. Soon those stories reached Augustus's ears. His jaw clenched at the thought of Sarah's voice enriching anyone else but him. To Grimsby, it was worse. The crowd that once jeered at his carnival now spoke with reverence of the Angel of Harmony Ridge. "They stole my property," Augustus spat, clutching a box of Sarah's old phonograph cylinders. "I still hold her contract, and I'll prove it in court or take her back myself." Grimsby grinned, cigar smoke curling. Law's slow, guns are faster. Together they began weaving schemes to reclaim what they believed was theirs. Meanwhile, Sarah uncovered Orpheus's secret. One bitter evening, while dusting shelves in the library annex, she found a portrait tucked inside a leather scorebook. A woman stared out with eyes as bright as her own, hair swept into a singer's crown, lips frozen mid-aria. On the back was written, "Elena Sterling, prima donna of Vienna, beloved wife." When Orpheus entered and saw her holding it, his face hardened like a slammed door. For a long time he said nothing, only took the portrait gently from her hands and set it back on the shelf. Then, with a sigh that carried years, he spoke. "Elena was my wife, my muse. She sang until her lungs collapsed with sickness. I built Harmony Ridge for her, a sanctuary where music would outlive time. But she never lived to sing here. Since the day she died, I have hated opera for reminding me of what I lost." His gaze shifted to her, soft and pained. "Until your voice reached me through the carnival bars. For the first time in 10 years, I felt music wasn't punishment, but grace." Sarah's chest tightened with guilt and wonder. She realized she had not just stepped into his home. She had stepped into the hollow of his grief. Yet her own secret pressed back against her ribs. She had left Boston not only because critics mocked her figure. She had left debts. Debts Augustus had promised to clear in exchange for her hand. In her trunk, hidden beneath dresses, lay the letters of creditors still demanding payment. If Augustus dragged her name into court, she might lose not just her dignity, but everything Orpheus had given her. The tension grew heavier with each passing day. Sarah sang brighter than ever in the rehearsal hall, but fear threaded her notes. Orpheus hammered iron at his forge, sparks flying like anger, but silence sat in his eyes. Both knew the world below would not ignore them forever. Their fears proved true one morning when a rider arrived breathless at the ridge. He carried a notice from the county courthouse. Augustus Fairweather had filed suit, claiming Seraphina Nightingale was his contracted fiancée and had been unlawfully abducted by Orpheus Sterling. Attached to the notice was a warning. The sheriff would come to Harmony Ridge to collect testimony. Sarah's knees buckled as she read it. "They'll drag me back," she whispered. "They'll say I belong to them." Orpheus folded the notice slowly, his jaw clenched. "No, Sarah, you belong to no man, not Augustus, not Grimsby, not even me, unless you choose it." His words struck deeper than any vow, yet the truth remained. The law, corrupted by money, might not hear her choice. That night, as storm clouds gathered above the ridge, Orpheus laid out the truth. "They will come," he said, his voice heavy as a funeral bell, "with papers, with lies, perhaps even with guns. When they do, I will stand. But Sarah—" He looked at her then, his massive frame shadowed by firelight, his eyes raw. "Are you willing to stand with me?" Silence hung like a held breath. Sarah thought of the cage, of jeers, of contracts signed in deceit. She thought of the music they had made together, of the way Orpheus's hands trembled when he tuned her piano, of the way he listened as though her voice could heal the cracks in his soul. Her answer was soft but unshaken. Yes, I'll stand. And so the stage was set, not for an aria, not for a performance, but for the fiercest act of their lives. The storm broke the very night Augustus and Grimsby came for her. Rain lashed the mountain in sheets, thunder cracked against the ridge, and lanterns bobbed in the dark as horses struggled up the muddy path toward Harmony Ridge. From the balcony of the music hall, Sarah saw them. Augustus hunched under an umbrella, clutching a box of phonograph cylinders like a relic. Grimsby, in his fur-lined coat, cigar glowing even through the rain. Behind them, the sheriff of Hollow Creek, flanked by half a dozen deputies and hired thugs with rifles. They halted at the foot of the great oak doors. The sheriff pounded his fist. "Sterling, by order of the county court, open up. We're here for Miss Nightingale." Inside, Orpheus stood tall, the stormlight catching on his silver hair. He had donned no armor but his black conductor's coat, its tails whipping in the wind that tore through the open hall. His voice carried like a drumbeat. "She is free. She has chosen her life. You'll not drag her into chains." Grimsby sneered. "She's a fat songbird worth a fortune, a freak that sings. I bought her once, and I'll cage her again." "Silence!" Orpheus thundered, stepping forward. "She is no freak. She is my equal, my partner, and the angel whose voice gave my soul back to me." Sarah moved beside him, trembling but resolute. Rain clung to her gown, lightning flashed across her face. "You called me a contract, a commodity," she cried toward Augustus, "but I am not your property. My voice is mine. My life is mine." The sheriff raised a hand. "Enough words. She's coming with us." Before he could finish, Orpheus struck the first chord on the great organ. A roar of sound surged through the hall, deep notes rolling like thunder through the beams of the building. Windows rattled, the very floor seemed to shake. The deputies staggered back, covering their ears. And then Sarah sang. Her voice soared above the storm, a high, clear aria that pierced the rain and cut through the sneers. The notes rang with defiance, with grief turned into fire. The sound disoriented the thugs, made lanterns swing, glass shatter. Lightning split the sky in answer, as if the heavens themselves joined the song. Grimsby cursed, stumbling backward. "Stop that devil's noise!" But Augustus pressed forward, desperate, clutching the box of recordings. "You belong to me, Seraphina. The world will hear your voice through my cylinders, whether you will it or not." Sarah's song broke into silence just long enough for her to shout back, "No, Augustus, the world will hear my voice as mine and as his." She reached for Orpheus's hand, fingers clasping tight. The sheriff, dazed by the storm of sound, finally dropped his warrant. "I've heard enough," he muttered, shaken not by law but by truth. "This woman is no prisoner. She's where she belongs." Thunder boomed like an ovation as Augustus lunged in rage. Orpheus met him head-on, striking the box of cylinders from his hands. They tumbled, shattered on the wet stone floor, fragments of Sarah's stolen past dissolving in the storm. Defeated, Augustus collapsed to his knees. Grimsby cursed and fled into the dark. Deputies scattered, unwilling to fight against music and mountain both. When the doors closed and the storm began to wane, Orpheus turned to Sarah. Rain dripped from his hair, his chest heaved with the force of battle, yet his voice was soft. Reverend, you sang us free. Sarah, breathless, laid her head against his chest. No, she whispered, we sang together. The storm passed, leaving Harmony Ridge wrapped in a hush so deep it felt like the mountain itself was catching its breath. The shattered cylinders lay in pieces on the stone floor, glittering like broken lies. Beyond the doors, silence replaced the jeers and threats. Augustus and Grimsby were gone, the deputies scattered to the lowlands. Inside, firelight flickered back to life in the great hall. Orpheus set aside his conductor's coat, shoulders weary, hands still trembling from both music and fury. Beside him, Sarah sat at the grand piano, her fingers brushing the keys not to play, but simply to feel their cool promise. "You're safe here now," he said at last, his voice low but sure, as though he were vowing it to the walls themselves. Sarah turned toward him, eyes shining with more than exhaustion. "Safe," she repeated, as if testing the word, then nodding softly. A tear slid down her cheek, but it was not of fear. It was of relief. He crossed the hall, each step heavy with the weight of choice. When he reached her, he touched her cheek with the gentleness of a man who had known loss too well. "This home, it was built for music, for a woman I thought I'd lost forever. Now it waits for you, if you'll have it, if you'll have me." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind died to a whisper, carrying the faint scent of pine and wet earth. Sarah laid her hand over his. "Then let this house be filled with new songs, yours, mine, ours." They sat there in silence, firelight dancing over them, two souls scarred and stitched together by music. Yet, beyond Harmony Ridge, the world still stirred with envy, greed, and rumor. Would love and music be enough to withstand what might come next? Only the mountain and time would answer. Stories like this remind us that love has the power to break cages and turn shame into song. Sarah was mocked, sold, and silenced, but in the end her voice rose higher than greed, higher than cruelty, and found its true harmony beside the one man who heard her soul. Every time I share a tale like this, I'm reminded how stories connect us across miles and hearts. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? Which part of this story moved you most? If you still believe that real love can set us free, then stay close, because the next story is waiting for you.